3 gunshots. That's what stopped me mid-swing, the axe frozen above the pine log. Nobody hunting deer fires 3 times. Not unless something's gone wrong. The first 2, I figured for hunters. Deer season had another week, and plenty of men from Silver Ridge came out this far when the snows started, looking for elk that wandered down from the high country. But nobody shoots a deer 3 times in a row. Not unless something's gone wrong. The saw clattered against the woodpile. My pine log rolled in the snow, settling with a soft thud. The Winchester hung on 2 nails driven into the barn wall, right where I could grab it without thinking. The rifle hung on 2 nails driven into the barn wall, right where I could grab it without thinking. 5 years living alone teaches you to keep certain things close. Water, firewood, weapons. The cold bit through my coat as I stepped away from the woodpile. December in the Gila River Valley doesn't forgive carelessness, and the wind that morning carried ice in its teeth. I'd seen storms roll in fast enough to bury a man who wandered too far from shelter. But the shots had come from the north pasture, maybe a half-mile out, and something in my chest pulled tight when I heard them. I started walking. Then I started running. The snow was fresh from the night before, about 4 inches deep, and it slowed me down more than I wanted. My boots punched through the crust with every step, and my breath came out in short white bursts that hung in the air behind me. The fence line that marked the edge of my property ran along a low ridge, and when I crested it, I saw them. 3 men on horseback, 1 figure on foot, stumbling through the drifts. The rider in front had his rifle raised. I didn't think. I brought the Winchester up and fired into the sky. The crack echoed across the valley, sharp and clean, and all 4 of them froze. The mounted men turned their horses toward me. The one on foot collapsed into the snow. I worked the lever action and chambered another round. The sound carried in the cold air, deliberate and unmistakable. "That's far enough," I called out. The lead rider was a big man, maybe 40, with a beard that hadn't seen a razor in months. He wore a blue cavalry coat that had seen better days, and a hat pulled low over his eyes. His horse stamped and snorted, sending up little clouds of steam. "This ain't your concern, old man," he said. His voice had the flat accent of someone born further east, Kansas maybe, or Missouri. "On my land, everything's my concern." He studied me for a long moment. I kept the rifle pointed at the ground between us, but my fingers stayed near the trigger. The other 2 riders shifted in their saddles. One of them had his hand on his pistol. The big man spat into the snow. "You know what you're protecting?" "A boy who's bleeding. That's all I need to know. That boy's Apache. His people killed white men. Women, too." "And what are you? Law?" He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We're close enough." "Not close enough for me to let you shoot an unarmed kid on my property." We stared at each other across 50 yards of snow and sagebrush. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of pinon smoke from somewhere far off. The boy in the snow wasn't moving. I could see blood on his shoulder, dark against the white ground. Finally, the big man pulled his horse's head around. "Your funeral, old-timer. You want to die for a redskin? That's your choice." They rode off to the east, taking their time, like men who knew they'd made their point. I watched until they disappeared over the next ridge. Then I ran to the boy. He was unconscious when I reached him, 17, maybe 16, hard to tell. He had long black hair matted with snow and blood, and his face was the color of ash. The wound in his shoulder was from a rifle round, entry hole in the back, exit through the front. Clean, at least. The bullet had passed through without hitting bone. I got my arms under him and lifted. He didn't weigh much, lighter than the feed sacks I hauled twice a week. His head lolled against my chest, and I felt his breath, shallow and quick, against my neck. The walk back to the house took 20 minutes. By the time I kicked open the door, my arms were shaking and my back screamed with every step. I laid him on the kitchen table and started cutting away his shirt. The wound was bad, but I'd seen worse. A lot worse. My hands moved without thought, following patterns I'd learned 30 years ago in a different life. Boil water, clean cloth, whiskey for disinfecting, though I had precious little left and every drop hurt to pour over torn flesh instead of down my throat. I packed the wound with strips torn from an old sheet, wrapped it tight, and checked his pulse. Steady enough. His breathing evened out after a few minutes, and the gray color started to fade from his lips. While I worked, I noticed details. His clothes were good quality, not the rags you'd expect from reservation Indians. Deerskin pants with careful beadwork along the seams, a silver pendant around his neck, shaped like an eagle. His hands had calluses in the places you get from handling reins and rope, not farm tools. This wasn't some random Apache boy. This was someone's son, someone important. When I finished bandaging him, I carried him to the small bedroom at the back of the house, the room where my daughter used to sleep before the sickness took her. I laid him on the bed and covered him with 2 blankets. Then I went back to the kitchen and sat down in the chair by the stove. My hands were shaking. Not from the cold, not from the work. From something else, something I'd kept buried for 5 years and thought I'd never have to face again. On the wall above the kitchen table hung a single photograph in a cracked frame, a younger version of myself, clean-shaven and smiling, standing next to a woman with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a bun. 2 children sat in front of us. A boy, maybe 9 years old, serious-faced and proud in his Sunday clothes. A girl, 6, with ribbons in her hair and a gap-toothed grin. Emily, Daniel, Ruth, all dead before their time. All buried in the plot behind the barn, under 3 wooden crosses I'd carved myself because I couldn't afford stone markers. I'd come home from Fort Union to find them cold in their beds, the whole house reeking of sickness and death. The neighbors had done what they could, but influenza doesn't care about kindness or prayer. It takes who it wants and leaves the survivors to count the cost. I looked at the boy sleeping in Ruth's old room, and I saw Daniel's face, not in features. The Apache kid didn't look anything like my son, but in the helplessness, the vulnerability, the simple fact of being young and hurt and alone. I couldn't save my own children, but maybe I could save this one. The rest of that day passed in a gray blur. I checked on the boy every hour. His fever spiked once around sunset, and I had to strip off the blankets and sponge him down with cool water until it broke. He muttered in his sleep, words I couldn't understand, a language that sounded like water running over stones. Night fell hard and fast, the way it does in winter. I lit the lamps and fed the stove and tried not to think about the 3 riders and where they might be. If they came back with more men, I didn't have much of a plan beyond the Winchester and the 12 rounds in my ammunition box. But they didn't come back. Not that night. The boy woke up just after midnight. I was dozing in the chair by his bed when I heard him stir. His eyes opened, dark and confused, and he tried to sit up. I put a hand on his chest, gentle but firm. "Easy. You've been shot. You need to rest." He stared at me for a long moment, breathing hard. Then he said in clear English with only a slight accent, "Why did you help me?" The question caught me off guard. "You needed help. I am Apache. You are white. We are enemies. You're a boy who was bleeding in my field. That's all that matters." He studied my face, looking for something. A lie, maybe, or a trap. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he relaxed slightly and let his head fall back against the pillow. "My name is Chaska," he said. Silas Garrett. Those men who shot me, they were soldiers. They said they would take me back to Fort Stanton, but they were going to kill me." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Why would they kill you?" "Because my father is Chief Karuk. They want to make war with my people. If they kill me and say Apaches did it, the army will have their excuse." I sat back in my chair and let that sink in. Political murder dressed up as Indian violence. It wasn't the first time I'd heard of such things. Probably wouldn't be the last. "Your father's going to come looking for you," I said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. And when he finds you here?" Chaska closed his eyes. "I do not know, but you saved my life. That means something to my people." He drifted back to sleep before I could ask what it meant. I sat there watching him breathe, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest under the blankets, and I wondered what I'd gotten myself into. The answer came 2 days later. I spent those 2 days taking care of Chaska and waiting for something to happen. The boy's fever broke on the second morning, and by afternoon he was sitting up and eating the thin soup I'd made from the last of my venison. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words were careful and thoughtful, like someone who'd learned English from books and missionaries and wasn't quite comfortable with the rhythm of casual speech. He asked about the photograph on the wall. I told him the simple truth. My family. Dead 5 years. Influenza. He nodded and didn't ask anything else. But later, when I was changing his bandages, he said quietly, "I had a brother. He died when I was 10. A hunting accident. My father has never been the same." It was the only personal thing he shared, and I understood it for what it was. An offering. A way of saying he knew what loss tasted like. On the morning of the 3rd day, I heard horses. I was outside splitting wood when I saw them. A line of riders on the ridge to the north, maybe 30 of them, sitting their horses in perfect stillness. Even from half a mile away, I could tell they were Apache, the way they sat, the way they moved as one unit, like a flock of birds turning in flight. I set down the axe and walked to the house. Chaska was standing at the window, one hand pressed against the glass. "Your father?" I asked. "Yes." "Is he going to kill me?" Chaska turned to look at me, and for the first time since I'd found him, he smiled. It was a small smile, uncertain but real. "I do not think so. But I also did not think those soldiers would try to kill me. The world is not always what we expect." Helpful words. I picked up my Winchester and stepped out onto the porch. The riders came down the slope in a slow, measured walk. They spread out as they approached, forming a loose semicircle around my house, but they kept their rifles down and their hands visible. A good sign. Maybe. The man in the center rode a big paint horse with a white blaze across its face. He was maybe 50 years old, lean and hard, with a face that looked like it had been carved from the same red stone as the cliffs to the east. He wore a mix of traditional Apache clothing and white man's gear, a deerskin shirt under a wool coat, buckskin leggings and cavalry boots. An eagle feather hung from a beaded cord around his neck. He stopped his horse 20 feet from my porch and looked at me with eyes that gave nothing away. "You are Silas Garrett," he said. Not a question. His English was better than Chaska's, smooth and precise. "I am." "You have my son." "I do. He's inside. He's alive." Something flickered across the chief's face. Relief, maybe, or surprise. It was gone too fast to tell. "3 men shot him and left him to die," I continued. "I found him in my north field, brought him here and patched him up. He'll be fine in another week." Chief Kuruk sat very still on his horse. Behind him, the other riders waited without moving, without speaking. The only sound was the wind and the distant cry of a hawk somewhere over the valley. "Why did you help him?" Kuruk asked. It was the same question Chaska had asked, and I gave the same answer. "He needed help. You could have left him. Many would have." "I've buried enough children." The words came out before I could stop them, rough and raw. Kuruk's eyes went to the photograph visible through the kitchen window, then back to my face. He saw. He understood. He dismounted and gestured for me to stay where I was. Then he walked past me into the house. I heard his footsteps, heard him speak to Chaska in their own language, heard the low murmur of conversation. When he came back out, his expression had changed. Softer somehow. More human. "You saved my son's life," he said. "According to the laws of my people, blood must answer blood. Life must answer life. You gave me back my son. I must give you something of equal value." I started to say I didn't want anything, but he held up his hand. "You do not understand. This is not a gift. This is a debt. If I do not pay it, my son's spirit will carry shame. My honor will carry shame. You will accept payment." He turned and called out in Apache. The riders parted, and from behind them came 20 women on foot. They were young, most of them, ranging from maybe 18 to 30. They wore traditional Apache dresses, deerskin and calico and wool, and they walked with their heads down, eyes on the ground. My stomach dropped. "Choose one," Kuruk said. "She will be your wife. That is how we pay debts of life." I stared at him, at the women, at the impossible situation unfolding in front of me. I don't want a wife. I just did what was right. Karuk's face went hard again. "You do not understand. If I do not pay this debt, it will poison my son's future. It will poison relations between my people and yours. You will choose, or you will insult me and my tribe." The women stood in a line now, silent and still. Most of them kept their eyes down. A few glanced up briefly, then away. They were terrified. I could see it in the set of their shoulders, the way they held themselves, ready to run or fight or collapse. One woman stood slightly apart from the others. She didn't look down. She looked straight ahead, past me, past everything, like she was somewhere else entirely. She was maybe 27, with long black hair and a single braid and a face that might have been beautiful if it wasn't so carefully empty of expression. Her dress was patched at the hem, and there was a faint bruise on her jaw, old and fading. Something about her steadiness drew me. Or maybe it was the way she didn't seem to care what happened next. Like she'd already survived worse than this. I pointed at her. Her. Karuk looked at the woman, then back at me. "You choose wisely. Takala has no family left in our tribe. She will serve you faithfully." He said something in Apache. The other women melted back toward the horses. Takala didn't move. She stood there, alone now, still looking at nothing. Karuk mounted his horse. Chaska appeared in the doorway, leaning on the frame, and his father rode over to him. They spoke briefly, too quiet for me to hear. Then Karuk reached down and gripped his son's shoulder once, hard, before turning away. The riders left the way they'd come, a silent procession back up the ridge. In minutes they were gone, swallowed by distance and the gray winter sky. I turned to look at Takala. She was looking at me now, really looking, and what I saw in her eyes made my blood freeze. Hatred, pure and absolute. She walked toward me, slow and deliberate, and stopped 3 feet away. "I know who you are," she said in perfect English. "8 years ago you killed my husband." The world tilted. I grabbed the porch railing to steady myself. "His name was Matto," she continued, her voice flat and cold. "The battle at Rio Grande, 1875. You shot him while I watched. Do you remember?" I did remember. God help me, I remembered every detail. The skirmish line, the order to fire, the Apache warrior with the bow who'd fallen when my rifle bucked against my shoulder, the woman screaming as she ran to his body. "I didn't know," I said, and my voice sounded like a stranger's. "I didn't know he was your husband." "It does not matter what you knew. You killed him. And now, by the laws of my people, I belong to you." She smiled, but it was terrible, empty. "Karuk knows. He sent me here on purpose, to see if you are worthy of forgiveness, or if you are just another white man who takes and destroys." She turned and walked into my house, into my life, into the careful silence I'd built over 5 years of grief. I stood on the porch as the sun climbed higher and the day grew no warmer. Inside I could hear her moving around, opening cupboards, finding her way through rooms that had held nothing but ghosts for so long. I'd saved a boy's life, and in return, I'd been given the woman whose husband I'd killed. Somewhere, God or fate or whatever force moves the world was laughing. I closed my eyes and leaned against the doorframe and wondered what price I'd have to pay before this debt was finally settled. The answer, I would learn, was everything. But that morning, standing in the cold with the smell of snow in the air and the weight of the past pressing down like a physical thing, all I knew was that my life had changed again. The careful solitude, the measured days, the slow march toward a quiet death, all of it was gone. In its place was a woman who hated me, a boy recovering from a bullet wound, and the certain knowledge that the 3 riders who'd tried to kill Chaska would not simply disappear. I went inside. Takala was standing by the kitchen table, looking at the photograph of Emily and the children. She didn't turn when I entered. "You lost your family," she said quietly. "Yes." "Then you understand." She finally looked at me. "I lost mine too, and you were the one who took them." I had no answer to that. Nothing I could say would change what I'd done. Nothing I could do would bring Matto back. So I said the only thing I could. "I'm sorry." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Sorry. White men are always sorry. After." She moved past me toward the small bedroom where Chaska had been sleeping. "I will sleep here. You will not touch me. You will not speak to me unless necessary. I am here because my chief commands it, but I am not yours. Do you understand?" "Yes." She closed the door. I heard the scrape of a chair being wedged under the handle. I stood in my kitchen, in the house I'd built with my own hands, and felt like a stranger in my own life. The stove needed feeding, the animals needed tending, the wood needed splitting. Life went on, even when it made no sense. I pulled on my coat and went back outside. The sun was higher now, burning off some of the cloud cover. In another month the worst of winter would hit. I needed to finish fixing the barn roof. I needed to check the fences. I needed to do 1,000 things that had nothing to do with the woman in my house or the boy I'd saved or the men who wanted him dead. But all I could think about was Matto, his face as he fell, the sound of the woman's scream, the way I'd walked away afterward without looking back, because looking back was how you got yourself killed in a fight. I'd been a soldier, I'd followed orders, I'd done what I was told because that's what soldiers do. And now, 8 years later, the bill had come due. I picked up the axe and started splitting wood. The blade bit into the frozen logs with solid, satisfying thuds. My breath came hard and fast, my arms burned. But I kept swinging, kept splitting, kept working, because work was the only thing I knew how to do when the world stopped making sense. By the time the sun started its slow slide toward the western mountains, I'd split enough wood to last a week. My hands were blistered, my back ached, but my mind was quieter. I went inside. Takala had made food, some kind of stew that smelled like sage and meat. She'd set 2 bowls on the table, one at each end. She sat at the far end, eating in silence. I washed my hands at the basin and sat down. The stew was good, better than anything I'd made for myself in years. We ate without speaking. When we finished, she took the bowls and washed them. I added wood to the stove. The routines of domestic life, performed by 2 people who shared a space but nothing else. As darkness fell, she went to her room and closed the door. I made my bed on the floor by the stove, where I'd slept since my family died. The bedroom I'd shared with Emily was still locked. I couldn't bring myself to open it. I lay awake for hours, listening to the wind outside and the creak of the house settling. Somewhere in the night, I heard Takala crying, soft, muffled sounds, like she was pressing her face into the pillow to keep from being heard. I wanted to go to her, to say something, anything. But what could I say? I'd killed the man she loved. No words would change that. So I lay there and listened and hated myself for everything I'd done and everything I'd failed to do. When sleep finally came, I dreamed of Rio Grande, of smoke and gunfire and men falling, of a woman's scream that went on forever. I woke before dawn to find Takala already up feeding the stove. She didn't look at me. I got dressed and went outside to tend the animals. The sky was the color of old bruises, heavy with the promise of more snow. I fed the horses and the 2 milk cows I kept and checked the henhouse for eggs. Normal things, ordinary things, but nothing felt normal anymore. When I came back inside, there was coffee waiting. Takala was gone, back in her room. I drank the coffee standing up, looking at the photograph on the wall. Emily would have known what to do. She always did. She had a way of cutting through complicated things to find the simple truth underneath. But Emily was 5 years dead, and I was on my own. The day passed like the one before. Work, silence, meals eaten at opposite ends of the table. Takala moving through the house like a ghost, touching nothing of mine, keeping to herself. That night, Chaska came to visit. I heard the horse before I saw him. Takala heard it too. She came out of her room and we both went to the window. Chaska rode up slowly, favoring his wounded shoulder. When he dismounted, I went out to help him. He waved me off. "I am stronger than I look," he said with a slight smile. Inside, Takala made him sit by the stove and brought him food. They spoke in Apache, their voices low and quick. I sat at the table and pretended not to watch. Finally, Chaska turned to me. "I came to warn you. The soldiers who shot me, they have told Fort Stanton that I attacked them. The army is looking for me, and they will look for anyone who helped me. Let them look. You do not understand. Captain Hollis, he commands Fort Stanton now. He is not a good man. He wants war with the Apache. He will use any excuse. I thought about the 3 riders, about their casual cruelty, about how easy it would be to turn one dead Apache boy into a justification for violence. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I will return to my people. My father expects it. But I wanted to tell you what my father did not say." He glanced at Takala. "He sent Takala to you because he knows who you are. He knows you killed Mato. He sent her to test you." "Test me how?" "To see if you are a man who deserves a second chance, or if you are just another killer." The words hung in the air between us. Takala's face was unreadable. "And what do you think?" I asked. Chaska stood up, wincing slightly. "I think you saved my life when you could have walked away. I think that means something. But Takala must decide for herself what it means to her." He left after that, riding back into the darkness. Takala and I stood on opposite sides of the room, the space between us filled with everything we couldn't say. "I will not make this easy for you," she said finally. "You want forgiveness? You will have to earn it." "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it." "Then what do you expect?" I thought about that. About what I wanted, what I hoped for. In the end, the answer was simple. "I expect to keep my word. You're here because of Kuruk's law. I'll respect that. I'll give you a place to live, food, safety, and I'll never touch you or force anything from you. That's all I can promise." She searched my face for a long time. Then, without another word, she went back to her room and closed the door. I sat by the stove until the fire burned down to coals. Outside, the first snowflakes of a new storm began to fall, soft and silent, covering everything in white. Somewhere out there, men were planning violence. Somewhere out there, Kuruk was watching to see what I would do. Somewhere in the past, Mato's ghost waited for justice or vengeance or whatever it is the dead wait for. But in that moment, in my house with a woman who hated me sleeping behind a closed door, all I could do was tend the fire and wait for morning. The debt was far from paid, the story was far from over, and I had no idea how much more it would cost before we found our way to the end. The first week passed in careful silence. Takala moved through my house like smoke, present but untouchable, leaving no mark except the meals that appeared on the table and the swept floors I woke to each morning. She never spoke unless I asked her a direct question, and even then her answers came in single words, clipped and cold. I gave her space. What else could I do? The woman's husband was dead by my hand, and no amount of domestic courtesy would change that fact. So I worked. I fixed the barn roof before the next snowstorm hit. I reinforced the fence posts along the southern boundary. I split enough wood to last through February. Physical labor kept my hands busy and my mind from circling endlessly around the same dark thoughts. But at night, lying on my bedroll by the stove, I heard her. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she paced. Once I heard her speaking in Apache, soft and rhythmic, and I realized she was praying. I never asked what she prayed for. I was afraid of the answer. On the 8th day, everything changed. I was in the barn that morning treating one of the horses for a stone bruise when I heard the crash. It came from the direction of the house, loud enough to carry across the yard even through the wind. I dropped my tools and ran. The kitchen was full of smoke. Takala stood by the stove, beating at flames that licked up the wall beside it. The pot of stew she'd been making had boiled over, spilling grease onto the hot iron, and the grease had caught fire. The flames had spread to a dish towel hanging too close, and from there to the dry wood of the wall. I grabbed a bucket of water from the barrel by the door and threw it on the flames. The fire hissed and sputtered but didn't die. Takala was coughing, her eyes streaming from the smoke. I pulled her away from the stove and threw another bucket of water, then another. On the 4th bucket, the flames finally gave up. We stood there in the smoky kitchen, both of us breathing hard, both of us covered in soot and water. The wall was blackened but intact. It could have been worse, much worse. Takala was shaking, not from cold, from something else. Her hands trembled as she wiped her face, and when she looked at me, I saw something break behind her eyes. "Mato died in fire," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. when your soldiers burned our village. I watched him try to save the children trapped in a lodge. The roof fell on him. I heard him screaming. I could not reach him." She sank down onto the floor, her back against the wall, and the shaking got worse. I knelt beside her, careful not to touch, not to crowd. "I didn't know," I said. "I wasn't there. I wasn't part of that. But you were part of the army that did it. You wore the same uniform. You followed the same orders." She looked at me, and for the first time since she'd arrived, her face showed something other than hatred. It showed pain, raw and terrible and old. "Do you know what it is like to smell burning flesh? To know it is someone you love and you can do nothing?" I thought of Emily and the children, of coming home to find them cold and still, the sickness having taken them while I was away serving at Fort Union, of knowing that if I'd been there, maybe I could have saved them. Maybe not, but at least I would have been there. "Yes," I said quietly. "I know." Something shifted in her expression, not forgiveness, not acceptance, but recognition, the acknowledgement that we both carried scars from different fires. She stood up abruptly and went to the basin to wash the soot from her hands. I opened the windows to let out the smoke, even though it meant letting in the cold. We worked in silence, cleaning up the mess, checking the damage, making sure no embers remained to restart the fire. When we finished, she made fresh coffee and poured 2 cups. She set one in front of me without a word, but it was the first thing she'd done that felt like an offering instead of an obligation. We sat at opposite ends of the table and drank the coffee. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Snow began to fall, heavy and wet, the kind that would pile up fast. "Why did you leave the army?" she asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. I set down my cup and looked at my hands, at the scars and calluses earned from years of work that had nothing to do with soldiering. "There was an order," I said slowly. "After a battle near Fort Craig, we'd captured some Apache fighters, mostly young men, a few boys. The captain wanted to make an example. He ordered us to execute them." "And did you?" "No, I refused. So did 2 other men. The captain had us arrested, charged with insubordination. We spent 3 months in the stockade. When they let us out, I was dishonorably discharged." I met her eyes. "I didn't refuse because I suddenly became a good man. I refused because I'd seen enough killing. I was tired of it. Tired of what it did to the men who did it, and the people it was done to." Takala was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "The man who killed Matto, who shot him at Rio Grande, was that before or after you refused the order?" "Before. 2 years before." "So you were still a soldier then? Still following orders?" "Yes." "And if you had been ordered to shoot the prisoners, would you have done it? Then, when you were still that man?" I wanted to lie, to tell her I would have refused even then, but she deserved the truth, however ugly. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe. Probably. I was a different person then." She nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something she already knew. "At least you are honest." She stood up and went to her room, but this time she didn't close the door all the way. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but I noticed. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, I didn't hear her crying. The next morning brought Marshal Tobias Quinn. I was outside feeding the horses when I saw him ride up the long approach to the house. He sat his horse like a man who'd spent too many years in the saddle and knew every ache it would cost him later. When he dismounted, he moved stiffly, favoring his left leg. "Silas," he said by way of greeting. "Tobias, it's been a while. 3 years. Since you came into town for supplies and I tried to convince you to rejoin civilization." He stamped his feet against the cold. "Can we talk inside? My bones don't take the cold like they used to." I led him into the kitchen. Takala was there, kneading bread dough at the table. She looked up when we entered, her eyes going immediately wary. Quinn's gaze took her in, and I saw him make the calculation. Apache woman, white rancher. He was smart enough not to comment, but I could see the questions forming behind his eyes. "Coffee?" I asked. "Please." I poured 3 cups. Takala wiped her hands and sat down, her posture straight and alert. Quinn settled into his chair with a sigh. "I'm here officially," he said. "Fort Stanton sent word. They're looking for an Apache boy, son of Chief Kuruk. He was shot by some men claiming he attacked them. You know anything about that?" I drank my coffee and considered my answer. Quinn and I had history. Back in 1870, when he was a young private who'd made the mistake of deserting during a campaign, I'd found him hiding in a supply wagon. I could have turned him in. Instead, I'd helped him get back to his unit and coached him through a story about getting separated during a skirmish. It had saved his career, maybe his life. He'd never forgotten it. But favors only stretch so far. "The boy was here," I said. "He'd been shot. I patched him up. He went back to his people." "Did you see who shot him?" "3 men. One wearing a cavalry coat. They were going to finish him off when I interrupted." Quinn's face darkened. "Can you identify them?" "Not well enough to swear to it, but I'd recognize the big one if I saw him again." "And you're sure the boy went back to his tribe?" "His father came for him, about a week ago." Quinn absorbed this. His eyes flicked to Takala again, lingering this time. "And the woman?" "Chief Kuruk's way of paying a debt. She stays here of her own accord." "Her own accord." Quinn's tone was carefully neutral. "Silas, you know what people will say, what the army will say." "I know, I don't much care." He sighed and rubbed his face. "You should care. Captain Hollis at Fort Stanton, he's not like the old commanders. He's ambitious. He wants to make a name for himself, and the way you make a name on the frontier is by putting down Indian troubles. If he can tie you to harboring Apache fugitives or keeping an Apache woman against regulations, he will. There are no regulations against it. Not yet. But there are Army policies about fraternization with hostiles, and there's talk in Washington about new laws regarding Indian relations. The Dawes Act, they're calling it. It's supposed to help Indians assimilate, but it's going to come with restrictions. Mark my words." Takala spoke for the first time. "What kind of restrictions?" Quinn looked at her in surprise, clearly not expecting her to speak English. "Restrictions on where Indians can live, who they can marry, what rights they have as citizens. It's all being debated now." "So I would not be allowed to stay here," she said flatly. "Maybe, maybe not. The law's not clear yet, but if Captain Hollis decides to make an issue of it, he could cause problems long before any law passes." I set my cup down harder than I intended. "Let him try." Quinn leaned forward. "Silas, I owe you. You know I do. But I have a family now. A wife, 2 daughters. I can't lose my position. If Hollis orders me to bring her in, or bring you in, I'll have to do it. I'm giving you warning now as a friend, but if it comes to orders, I'll follow them. Do you understand?" The betrayal sat between us like a living thing, not unexpected but painful nonetheless. I'd saved this man's career, and when I needed him, he was telling me he'd choose his safety over mine. But I couldn't entirely blame him. I'd made the same choice once, putting my survival above others. That's how I'd ended up shooting Matto in the first place. "I understand," I said quietly. He stood up, relief evident on his face. "I'll give you as much time as I can. But Hollis is already asking questions. If I were you, I'd think about what you're willing to lose for this." After he left, Takala and I sat in silence. The bread dough had risen in its bowl, ready for the oven. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving everything white and pristine and deceptively peaceful. "He will come back," Takala said. "The marshal, when the captain orders him. And he will take me. Not if I have anything to say about it." She looked at me with something like pity. "You cannot fight the entire army, Silas. You could not even fight your own conscience. My conscience is what got me into this, and it will get you killed if you are not careful." She was right, and I knew it. But knowing something and accepting it are different things entirely. The days after Quinn's visit took on a different quality. Before, we'd been 2 people sharing space, keeping our careful distances. Now we were 2 people aware that our time might be limited, that forces beyond our control were moving toward us like a slow avalanche. Takala began to talk more. Not about Matto, not yet, but about smaller things. She told me about growing up in her tribe, about learning to track deer with her father, about the songs her mother taught her. I told her about Emily, about how we'd met at a church social in St. Louis before the war, about Daniel's obsession with collecting interesting rocks and Ruth's habit of naming every animal on the ranch. We were not friends, we were not anything that had a name, but we were people sharing the same storm shelter, and that created its own kind of bond. On the 14th night, Chaska returned. He came alone this time, riding in just after sunset. When I opened the door, I saw immediately that something was wrong. His face was tight with worry. "My father wants to see you," he said without preamble. "Tomorrow, at dawn. He will meet you at the boundary stones, where your land meets the tribal hunting grounds." "What does he want?" He did not say, but he was very serious. Chaska glanced at Takala. "You should come too. He asked for both of you." After Chaska left, Takala and I prepared in silence. We both knew this summons could mean many things, none of them simple. Had Kuruk decided I'd failed his test? Was he reclaiming Takala? Or was this about something else entirely? I cleaned my rifle and checked my ammunition. Takala packed food and water. We didn't discuss what might happen. There was nothing to discuss until we knew what we were facing. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the photograph on the wall, about the family I'd lost and couldn't protect, about the woman sleeping in the next room whose husband I'd killed, about the boy I'd saved who might be the only reason I was still alive, about all the debts that accumulate over a lifetime and the impossibility of ever truly settling the accounts. We left before dawn, 2 horses moving through the darkness toward whatever waited at the boundary stones. The air was bitter cold, and our breath made white clouds that hung behind us like ghosts. The boundary stones marked the edge of my property and the beginning of the land the Army had grudgingly allowed the Apache to use for hunting. It wasn't a reservation, not officially, but it was understood territory. I'd never crossed it without permission. Kuruk was already there when we arrived, along with about 20 warriors. They sat their horses in a line, motionless in the pre-dawn gray. As we approached, one of the warriors moved forward. It took me a moment to recognize him. He was older than the others, maybe 60, with long gray hair and a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Kuruk dismounted and walked toward us. Takala slid from her horse and went to stand before him, her head bowed in respect. They spoke in Apache, their voices low and quick. I caught Kuruk glancing at me several times. Takala's responses were brief, but her posture was tense. Finally, Kuruk turned to me. "Takala says you have treated her with respect, that you have not forced yourself on her, that you have given her space to grieve." "Yes." "She also says you saved her from a fire, that you showed her the graves of your family, that you spoke honestly about your past." I waited. There had to be more. "My people have a saying," Kuruk continued. "The man who kills in battle is not the same as the man who kills in cold blood. You killed Matto in war. That is different from murder, but it still leaves a debt." "I know." "Takala must decide if she can live with that debt, if she can live with you. I sent her to you to give her that choice, not to punish her or you. Do you understand?" "I think so." Kuruk looked at Takala. "What is your choice?" She was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady but quiet. "I choose to stay, not because I have forgiven him, but because I have nowhere else to go, and because he lost his family too. We understand each other's pain. It wasn't love. It wasn't even friendship. But it was something. A beginning, maybe." Kuruk nodded slowly. "Then the debt is paid as much as it can be. Takala is yours, and you are responsible for her safety and happiness. If you fail in this, you will answer to me. Is this clear?" "Very clear." The old warrior with the scar moved his horse closer. He spoke to Kuruk in Apache, his tone urgent. Kuruk listened, then turned back to me. "Mosca says he knows you, from many years ago." I looked at the old warrior more closely. Something about him was familiar, but I couldn't place it. Mosca spoke in halting English. Fort Craig, 1870. After battle. You stop soldier from shoot me. You say enough blood. You let me go. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I did remember. A wounded Apache warrior, lying in the dirt after a skirmish. A young private named Collins standing over him with a pistol, ready to finish him off. And me, newly promoted to sergeant, stepping between them and saying exactly what Mosca had quoted. I'd forgotten about it. One small act of mercy in years of violence. But Mosca had remembered. I remember, I said. You saved my life then. You save Chaska now. 2 lives you give my people. This is why Kuruk trusts you. This is why I tell him send Takala, to see if you are same man. So that was it. The real reason behind Kuruk's test. Not just gratitude for saving Chaska, but a deeper evaluation based on my past actions, both good and bad. Kuruk mounted his horse. The army is coming. Captain Hollis has convinced his superiors that my people are planning attacks. It is not true, but truth does not matter to men who want war. When they come, you may be caught between us. I am telling you this because you have earned that much. When? I asked. Soon, maybe days, maybe weeks, but soon. He looked at Takala one last time. If you need sanctuary, you know where to find us. They rode away as the sun finally broke over the eastern mountains, painting the snow gold and red. Takala and I stood alone at the boundary stones, watching them disappear. Did you know? I asked. About Mosca? About what Kuruk was really doing? No, he does not share his plans with women. But I am not surprised. My chief is a careful man. He does not make decisions lightly. We rode back to the ranch in silence. The morning grew brighter, but the cold remained sharp and unforgiving. When we reached the house, Takala went inside to start breakfast while I tended the horses. As I was brushing down my mare, I heard more riders approaching. My hand went to my rifle, but then I saw the blue uniforms, and I knew our borrowed time had run out. Captain Vernon Hollis rode at the head of 15 cavalry troops. He was maybe 40, clean-shaven, with the kind of rigid posture that spoke of a man who'd learned everything from books and nothing from experience. His eyes swept over the ranch with obvious disdain. "Silas Garrett?" he called out. "That's right. Captain Vernon Hollis, Fort Stanton. I need to speak with you about a serious matter." I walked toward him, keeping my rifle pointed at the ground but not setting it aside. "Speak then." He dismounted and his men followed suit. They fanned out in a loose semicircle, hands near their weapons. Professional intimidation. "It's come to my attention that you're harboring an Apache woman on your property. Under territorial law and Army regulations, this is a violation. I'm here to take her into custody." "She's not in custody. She lives here by her own choice." "That's not how the law sees it. Indians aren't permitted to live with white citizens outside of designated areas without proper authorization." "What law? Show me the statute." His jaw tightened. "The law is being written as we speak. The Dawes Act will codify these restrictions. But even without it, I have authority under military jurisdiction to prevent potential hostile actions." "Hostile actions? She's a woman living in a house, cooking meals, minding her own business." "She's Apache. That makes her a potential security risk." Takala appeared in the doorway. She'd been listening, and her face showed no fear, only a kind of weary resignation. This was what she'd expected. What she'd known was coming. "I will go," she said quietly. "I do not wish to cause trouble." "No!" The word came out of me before I could think about it. "She stays." Hollis's hand went to his pistol. "Mr. Garrett, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. You want her, you'll have to go through me." It was stupid. Suicidal, even. One man against 15 soldiers. But I'd spent too many years following orders, doing what I was told, letting other people decide what was right. I'd killed Maddow because an officer said to fire. I'd watched prisoners mistreated because I was afraid to speak up. I'd failed my family because I was somewhere else, following someone else's commands. I was done following commands. Hollis drew his pistol. His men raised their rifles. I stood my ground, My Winchester held loose but ready, and then another voice cut through the tension. "Captain Hollis, I believe you're exceeding your authority." Marshal Tobias Quinn rode into the yard, his badge catching the morning sun. Behind him rode 3 deputies I didn't recognize. Hollis turned to him, irritated. "This is Army business, Marshal. Stay out of it." "This is civilian land, and Mr. Garrett is a civilian. That makes it my business. Now, I've reviewed the territorial statutes, and there's no law against what he's doing. And until the Dawes Act passes, if it passes, you have no authority here. I have authority wherever there's a potential Indian threat. And I see no threat. I see a woman and a rancher. If you want to press charges, do it through proper legal channels. But you're not taking her today." The 2 men stared at each other. Hollis's face had gone red with anger, but Quinn's was calm and immovable. Whatever I'd thought about Quinn's earlier betrayal, whatever doubts I'd had about his loyalty, he was paying his debt now. Finally, Hollis holstered his pistol. "This isn't over, Marshal, not by a long shot." "I expect not, but it's over for today." Hollis remounted, gestured sharply to his men, and they rode off in formation. The sound of hoofbeats faded slowly, leaving only the wind and the creak of leather as Quinn dismounted. He walked over to me, his expression carefully neutral. "I couldn't do that again," he said quietly. "I stood up for you today, but it cost me. Hollis will file a complaint. I'll probably lose my position within a month, so if you're planning to keep her, you'd better have a plan for what happens next." "I do," I said, though I didn't. Not really. Quinn looked at Takala, then back at me. "She worth it?" I thought about the question, about everything that had brought us to this moment. The deaths, the debts, the complicated web of obligation and guilt, and something that might, eventually, become something more. "Yes," I said. He nodded. "Then God help you both." After Quinn left, Takala and I stood in the yard for a long time, not speaking. The sun climbed higher. The snow began to melt in patches. Somewhere in the distance a hawk cried. "You should not have done that," she said finally. "You should have let me go." "Probably. You will lose everything because of me." "I've already lost everything once. At least this time it's my choice." She turned to look at me fully, and for the first time since she'd arrived, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't hatred or pain. It was curiosity, wonder even. "Why?" she asked. "Why choose this? Choose me? I am the wife of a man you killed." "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe because you're the only person who understands what it costs to keep living after everything you love is gone. Maybe because I'm tired of running from my mistakes. Or maybe because when Hollis said he was taking you, I realized I didn't want you to go." She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she walked back into the house and I followed. That night, she left her door open. Not an invitation, not forgiveness, but a sign that something had shifted. Some wall had developed its first crack. I lay on my bedroll and listened to her breathing and thought about Quinn's question. Was she worth it? Was any of this worth it? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew I was going to find out, whatever the cost. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of snow and pine and the distant smoke of fires I couldn't see. The army was gathering, war was coming, and I was standing in the path of it by choice, for the first time in my life making a decision based on something other than fear or duty. It felt terrifying and right in equal measure. Sleep came late, and when it did, I didn't dream of Rio Grande or burning villages or the faces of the dead. I dreamed of morning and coffee and a woman's voice asking me to pass the salt. Small things, ordinary things, things worth fighting for. The calm lasted 3 days. 3 days of something that almost resembled normal life. Takala and I fell into a rhythm, not comfortable exactly, but functional. She cooked, I worked the ranch. We ate meals together and sometimes we talked, small talk mostly, the weather, the horses, whether the chickens needed more feed, nothing about Maddo or the army or what would happen when Captain Hollis returned. We both knew he would return. Men like Hollis don't accept being challenged in front of their troops. They nurse their wounded pride until it festers into action. On the fourth morning, I woke to find Takala already up, standing at the window. The sky was still dark, the sun not yet threatening the horizon. "Something's wrong," she said without turning around. I joined her at the window. At first I saw nothing but the usual landscape of snow and shadow. Then I caught it. A faint orange glow to the south, maybe 5 miles away. Too steady to be lightning, too bright to be a campfire. "Fire," I said. "Not just fire. That is the Morrison Ranch. I saw it when I rode through with Karuk's people. 3 buildings. That much flame means all of them are burning." We watched in silence as the glow intensified, then gradually began to fade. By the time the sun came up, there was only smoke, a dark column rising into the pale morning sky. I was saddling my horse when Takala emerged from the house, dressed for riding. "You should stay here," I said. "No. If this is what I think it is, we both need to see." We rode south together, pushing the horses harder than I liked through the snow. It took us an hour to reach what was left of the Morrison place. The buildings were still smoldering. The main house had collapsed in on itself, just a skeleton of blackened timbers. The barn was a pile of ash. The smaller outbuilding, maybe a smokehouse or storage shed, had fared slightly better, but not by much. And in the yard, written in stones large enough to read from horseback, was a message: "Apache revenge." But there were no bodies, no blood, no signs of violence beyond the fire itself. Takala dismounted and walked the perimeter of the ruins, reading the ground the way her people had taught her. I watched her crouch beside a set of tracks, then move to another set, her face growing darker with each discovery. 5 horses, she said. "Shod horses. The Apache do not shoe their horses this way. And look." She pointed to a clear boot print in the snow. "Army boots, standard cavalry issue." I saw it too. The distinctive tread, the size. These weren't Apache raiders. This was something else entirely. "Hollis," I said. "Yes. He burns his own people's ranch and blames my people. Now he has his excuse for war." A cold knot formed in my stomach. The Morrisons had pulled out 2 months ago, heading back east after a bad summer nearly bankrupted them. I'd bought some of their equipment at auction. The ranch had been abandoned. Hollis must have known that, must have counted on it. "We need to warn Karuk," Takala said. "We need proof first. If we go to him with just a theory, it won't matter. But if we can prove the army did this..." "How?" "The marshal already stood against Hollis once. He will not do it again. And who else has authority?" She was right. Quinn had spent his political capital defending us. He'd be lucky to keep his job after that. And the territorial governor was 3 weeks' ride away in Santa Fe, assuming the mountain passes were even clear. We were on our own. We rode back to my ranch in grim silence. As we approached, I saw another horse tied to my porch rail. For a moment I thought it might be Hollis, come to finish what he'd started. But the horse was too small, too old. Marshal Quinn sat on my porch steps, his head in his hands. He looked up when he heard us approach. His face was haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. "Silas, Miss Takala." He stood slowly, using the railing for support. "I came to tell you in person. I've been dismissed. Official letter came this morning from the Territorial Marshal's office. Captain Hollis filed a complaint about my interference in military operations. They didn't even give me a hearing." "I'm sorry, Tobias." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Don't be. I'm not. I made my choice when I stood up to Hollis, and I'd make it again. But there's more. The Army's calling up volunteers. They're saying the Apache burned the Morrison ranch and killed the family. Never mind that the Morrisons left months ago. They're building a war party and they'll ride out within the week." "It was Hollis who burned it," I said. "We were just there. The tracks are all wrong. Shod horses, army boots. He's manufacturing his war." Quinn nodded wearily. "I figured as much, but it won't matter. People want to believe the worst about Indians. Give them a burned ranch and some scary stories, and they'll sign up for whatever the Army's selling. Hollis will have his war, and a lot of people are going to die for his ambition." Takala spoke quietly. "Then I must warn my people." "They already know," Quinn said. Chaska came through town this morning, bold as brass, riding right down Main Street. He stopped long enough to tell anyone who'd listen that the Apache had nothing to do with the fire. Then he rode out before anyone could grab him. Kid's got courage, I'll give him that. He's also painted a target on his back, I said. On all your backs. Hollis knows you've been helping the Apache. He knows Miss Takala is here. He's going to use that. Already heard talk in town about how you've gone native, how you're probably feeding information to the raiders. Won't be long before someone decides to do something about it. I looked at Takala. Her face was composed, but I could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. What do you think we should do? I asked Quinn. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. Officially, I can't tell you anything. I'm not a marshal anymore. Unofficially, as a friend, get her out of here. Take her to Mexico. It's only 50 miles south. Cross the border and Hollis can't touch you. Start over somewhere they don't care about Indian wars and white man's guilt. Run, Takala said flatly. Survive, Quinn corrected. There's a difference. Is there? If we run, Hollis wins. He gets his war. My people die. And the lie stands forever. Quinn spread his hands helplessly. What's the alternative? You can't fight the whole army. Even if you prove Hollis set the fire, you think anyone will care? You think they'll hold a white officer accountable for lying about Indians? He was right. We all knew it. Justice was a luxury, and we couldn't afford it. But something in me rebelled against the idea of running. I'd spent my whole life running from consequences, from hard choices, from the weight of my own actions. I'd run from the stockade by taking a discharge instead of fighting the charges. I'd run from my guilt about Maddo by burying myself in isolation. I'd even run from Emily's grave, unable to face the enormity of my failure to protect them. I was tired of running. There might be another way, I said slowly. They both looked at me. Hollis needs this war to be righteous. He needs people to believe the Apache are monsters. But what if we show them something different? What if we bring the truth to them so publicly, so undeniably, that even Hollis can't spin it? How? Takala asked. I thought about it, turning the pieces over in my mind. Kuruk. If he comes to town under a flag of truce, if he speaks to the people directly, tells them his people didn't burn the Morrison Ranch, offers to help investigate, shows them he wants peace, not war, it might give folks pause. It might make them question Hollis's story. Quinn shook his head. And it might get Kuruk killed. You think Hollis will let him waltz into Silver Ridge and undermine everything he's built? The second Kuruk shows his face, someone will put a bullet in it. Not if he has protection. Not if people are watching. Who's going to protect him? Not the army. And I'm not a marshal anymore. I will, I said. The words hung in the cold air. Takala was staring at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. Quinn stood up, pacing across the porch. Silas, that's suicide. Even if you get Kuruk to agree to this insanity, even if you somehow get him to town without being shot on sight. What then? You stand between him and an angry mob? Between him and the whole damn army? If I have to. Why? Why throw your life away for this? I looked at Takala. At the woman whose husband I'd killed, who'd been forced into my house by tribal law, who'd slowly, painfully, begun to see me as something other than a monster. At the woman who'd left her door open at night, who'd started saying my name instead of just you, who'd smiled, actually smiled, when I told a stupid joke about the chickens yesterday. Because someone has to, I said. And because if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I had a chance to do the right thing, and I ran instead. I've made that choice too many times already. Takala stepped closer. If you do this, you will lose everything. Your ranch, your life, maybe. For what? For people who will not thank you? For a chief who tested you like a curiosity? For me? For all of it. And yes, for you. She searched my face, and something passed between us, something I didn't have words for. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The first green shoots pushing through scorched earth. Then I will help, she said. I will go to Kuruk, He will listen to me. But Silas, if we do this, there is no going back." "I know." Quinn threw up his hands. "You're both crazy, but hell, I'm already unemployed. Might as well go all in. I'll come with you to Kuruk's camp. Having an ex-marshal along might help convince him you're serious." That afternoon, the three of us rode north toward the tribal hunting grounds. We moved quickly but carefully, watching for army patrols. Hollis would have scouts out by now, looking for any excuse to escalate. We reached the boundary stones at sunset. Takala dismounted and called out in Apache, her voice carrying across the snowy expanse. For several minutes nothing happened. Then figures emerged from the trees, mounted warriors forming a loose ring around us. Chaska rode forward, his face grave. "You should not have come here. The army is preparing to attack. My father is gathering all our people to prepare for war." "That's why we're here," I said. "We need to stop it." "How? Will you hold back the tide with your hands?" "If I have to, but I'm hoping your father has a better idea." Chaska studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Follow me, but do not expect him to listen. He is tired of white man's promises." We followed him through the woods to a hidden valley where the Apache had made camp. Dozens of lodges stood among the trees, smoke rising from cooking fires. Women worked at various tasks while children played in the snow. Warriors sharpened weapons and checked their horses. It looked like any other camp preparing for winter, except everyone was preparing for war. Kuruk emerged from the largest lodge as we approached. His face showed no surprise at seeing us, only a kind of weary resignation. "Silas Garrett, you come with your woman and the broken marshal. This must be important." "It is. Hollis is planning to attack. He burned the Morrison ranch himself and blamed your people. He's using it to justify war." "I know this. Chaska told me. It changes nothing. The white men believe what they want to believe. If not the Morrison ranch, then something else. They have always wanted our land. Now they have their excuse." "But what if they didn't believe it? What if you came to Silver Ridge under a flag of truce, spoke to the people directly, showed them you want peace?" Kuruk's laugh was bitter. "They would shoot me before I spoke 3 words. Not if I'm standing with you. Not if Quinn is there as witness. Not if enough people see it happening that Hollis can't just make you disappear. You ask me to walk into the wolf's den and trust that the wolves will suddenly become sheep. I'm asking you to take a chance on peace instead of accepting war as inevitable." Kuruk was silent for a long time. Around us the camp had gone quiet, people stopping their work to listen. Finally, the old warrior Maska stepped forward. He spoke in Apache to Kuruk, his voice firm and carrying. Kuruk responded, and they argued back and forth for several minutes. Other warriors joined in, some supporting Maska, some opposing. At last, Kuruk raised his hand for silence. He turned to me. "Maska reminds me that you saved his life many years ago when you could have let him die. He says you saved my son when you could have left him in the snow. He says you stood against the army for Takala when you could have surrendered her. He says these are not the actions of a man who lies. They're not. I'm asking you to risk your life, and I know what that means. But if we don't try this, the alternative is war. A war you might win battles in, but you'll lose in the end. The army has too many soldiers, too many guns. They'll keep coming until your people are destroyed or driven so far south you'll never come back. And if I do this thing, if I ride into your town and speak your words, what happens when the army attacks anyway? Then at least we'll know we tried. And some people, maybe not many, but some, will remember that you offered peace and it was rejected. That might matter someday." Kuruk looked at Takala. "What do you say, daughter of my tribe? Do you trust this white man with your chief's life?" Takala met his eyes steadily. "I trust him with more than that." The words hit me like a physical blow. She'd never said anything like that before, never even implied it. Kuruk nodded slowly. "Then I will do this. But not alone. I will bring 20 warriors, and if your townspeople attack, we will defend ourselves. I will not lead my men to slaughter." "Fair enough. We leave at dawn. Tell your people to gather in the town square. I will speak to them there, where all can hear. And then, Silas Garrett, We will see if your faith in white man's reason is justified." That night, we camped with the Apache. Takala stayed in her mother's old lodge with some of the women. Quinn and I were given a smaller lodge near the edge of camp. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw 100 ways this could go wrong. Hollis shooting Kuruk from ambush, the townspeople rioting, the warriors retaliating, blood in the snow and all my good intentions meaning nothing. Around midnight, the lodge flap opened. Takala slipped inside. She sat down across the fire from me, her face illuminated by the flickering light. "I could not sleep either," she said. "Worrying about tomorrow? About many things. Tomorrow, the past, the future." She paused. "About what I said to Kuruk. You didn't have to say that. I know you don't really trust me. Do you? Know what I feel?" She leaned forward slightly. "When I first came to your house, I hated you. I wanted you to suffer as I had suffered. I wanted to watch you realize what you had taken from me. I know. But then you did not act as I expected. You did not force me or hurt me or treat me like property. You gave me space. You shared your pain. You stood against the marshal and the captain for me. You chose me over your safety." She shook her head slowly. "I do not know when it changed. Maybe when you told me about Emily and your children. Maybe when you nearly died fighting the fire. Maybe when you refused to let Hollis take me. But something changed. Takala, I am not saying I have forgiven you for Matto. I may never forgive you completely. But I am saying that I see you now as more than the man who killed my husband. I see you as the man who saved Chaska, as the man who stands against injustice even when it costs him everything, as the man who might, if we both survive tomorrow, become someone I could care for." She stood up and moved toward the lodge entrance. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Back to the women's lodge. It is not proper for me to be here alone with you, but I wanted you to know. Before tomorrow, in case—" She didn't finish the sentence. After she left, I lay back down and stared at the smoke hole in the lodge roof, watching sparks spiral up into the darkness. Whatever happened tomorrow, at least I would know that this, right now, had been real. Dawn came too quickly. We rode toward Silver Ridge in a column, Kuruk at the front carrying a white flag made from a torn shirt tied to a lance. His 20 warriors spread out behind him, armed but with their weapons lowered. Quinn and I rode on either side of Kuruk. Takala rode with the warriors, her face set and determined. As we approached the town, I saw people starting to gather. News of our approach had clearly spread. Men emerged from shops and houses, many of them armed. Women pulled children inside. The atmosphere was tense, expectant, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Captain Hollis stood in the center of Main Street, backed by at least 30 soldiers in formation. His face was red with fury. "Garrett, what the hell do you think you're doing?" I dismounted, and Kuruk did the same. The warriors stayed mounted, ready to move. "Chief Kuruk has come under a flag of truce to address the people of Silver Ridge. He's going to tell them what really happened at the Morrison Ranch." "I know what happened. Apache raiders burned it and murdered the family. The Morrisons left 2 months ago. There was no family to murder. And the tracks at the ranch tell a different story. Shod horses, army boots. Someone burned that ranch to start a war, and we both know who." A murmur ran through the crowd. People were listening now, uncertain. Hollis's hand went to his pistol. "That's slander against the United States Army." "It's the truth. And if you're so sure I'm wrong, let Kuruk speak. Let people hear his side. What are you afraid of?" "I'm not afraid of anything. But I won't let a savage address civilized people." Kuruk spoke for the first time, his English clear and carrying. "I am Chief Kuruk of the Mescalero Apache. My people have lived on this land for more generations than your people can count. We have fought you, yes, when you took our hunting grounds and broke your treaties, but we did not burn the Morrison Ranch. We had no reason to. The family was gone. The land was empty. Why would we waste fire on empty buildings?" "To terrorize us," Hollis snapped. "To send a message." "What message? That we burn abandoned property? If we wanted to terrorize you, there are many ways more effective." Kuruk looked around at the gathered townspeople. I came here today to offer peace, to say that my people want to live without war. We are tired of death. We are tired of watching our children go hungry because we cannot hunt. We are tired of being blamed for every bad thing that happens in this territory. An old man in the crowd called out, "What about the cattle that went missing from my ranch last month? Did you find Apache tracks? Or did you find tracks from men wearing shoes, riding shod horses, who took your cattle and sold them in the next town over? There are many thieves in this territory. Not all of them are Apache." Hollis stepped forward. "Enough of this. Chief Kuruk, you're under arrest for inciting violence and conspiracy against the United States." "On what evidence?" I demanded. "On my authority as commanding officer of Fort Stanton. An authority that doesn't extend to civilian matters or false arrests." Hollis drew his pistol. "Step aside, Garrett." I moved to stand directly in front of Kuruk. "No." The crowd had grown to maybe 100 people now. They watched in silence, waiting to see what would happen. I could feel the weight of their attention, their judgment. Quinn stepped up beside me. "Captain, as former territorial marshal, I'm formally requesting an investigation into the Morrison fire before any arrests are made. If Chief Kuruk is lying, the evidence will show it. But if he's telling the truth, you're about to start a war over a crime you committed yourself." Hollis's face went purple. "You're a disgraced lawman with no authority." "But I'm a citizen with a voice, and so are they." Quinn gestured to the crowd. "Every person here has a right to hear the truth before blood gets spilled in their name." A woman in the crowd spoke up. "Let him talk. What's it hurt to listen?" "Yeah," another voice called. "If he's lying, we'll know soon enough." Hollis looked around at the crowd, and I saw him realize he was losing control of the narrative. His hand tightened on his pistol. "Last chance, Garrett. Move, or I'll move you." Time seemed to slow. I saw Takala's hand move toward the knife at her belt, saw the warriors shift in their saddles, saw Hollis's finger tighten on the trigger, and then a new voice cut through the tension. "Captain Hollis, I believe you're out of line." A man pushed through the crowd. He was maybe 60, well-dressed, with a silver beard and the kind of bearing that spoke of authority. I didn't recognize him, but clearly others did. People stepped aside respectfully. "Judge Thornton," Hollis said, and his voice had lost some of its certainty. "I've been listening to this exchange with great interest," the judge said, "and it seems to me that Mr. Garrett and Mr. Quinn are requesting a reasonable investigation before any military action is taken. As territorial circuit judge, I'm ordering exactly that. There will be a formal inquiry into the Morrison fire. Chief Kuruk will be a witness, not a prisoner. And if evidence emerges that Army personnel were involved in setting that fire, there will be consequences. Am I clear?" Hollis holstered his pistol slowly. "The Army doesn't answer to civilian courts. The Army answers to civilian oversight in all matters not directly related to combat operations. And unless we're at war, which we're not, you answer to me. Now stand your men down." For a long moment I thought Hollis might refuse. Thought he might shoot Kuruk or me or both of us and claim it was self-defense. But then he stepped back and gestured sharply to his soldiers. "Stand down, for now." The tension broke like a fever. People began talking among themselves, arguing, debating. Some sided with Hollis, insisting the Apache must be guilty. But others, a growing number, seemed willing to consider that maybe, just maybe, things weren't as simple as they'd been told. Judge Thornton approached Kuruk. "Chief, I'll need you to testify at the inquiry. It will be held in 3 days, enough time to examine the Morrison ranch properly. Can you agree to that?" Kuruk looked at me, then at the judge. "I will come, but I will bring my warriors. I will not walk into a trap." "That's acceptable. Mr. Garrett, I assume you'll testify as well?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Then we'll reconvene in 3 days. Until then, I suggest everyone go about their business and let cooler heads prevail." The crowd dispersed slowly. Hollis and his men withdrew toward the fort, but not before Hollis fixed me with a stare that promised retribution. Kuruk mounted his horse. Before leaving, he looked down at me. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Silas Garrett. But you kept your word. I will remember that." He rode out with his warriors, Takala among them. She looked back once, and in that glance I saw relief and something else. Pride, maybe. Quinn and I stood alone in the street as the last of the crowd melted away. "Well," he said, "that went better than expected. It's not over. Hollis won't let this go." "No, but we bought time, and sometimes that's all you can do." Judge Thornton approached us. "Mr. Garrett, a word?" We followed him to his hotel room. He poured 3 glasses of whiskey and handed them around. "I want you to understand something," he said. "I stopped Hollis today because I believe in law and order, but I'm not naive. The Army wants this war. Important people in Washington want this war. They want the Apache pacified, the land opened for settlement, the whole frontier brought under proper control. One inquiry isn't going to stop that momentum." "So why bother?" I asked. "Because small acts of justice matter, because truth matters, even when it doesn't win, and because I've lived long enough to know that the easy path, the path of least resistance, is usually the wrong one." He sipped his whiskey. "In 3 days I'll conduct a fair inquiry. I'll examine the evidence, I'll listen to testimony, and I'll issue a ruling based on facts, not politics. But Garrett, you need to prepare for the possibility that it won't matter, that even if I find in Kuruk's favor, the Army will find another excuse, another burned ranch, another dead settler. They'll get their war. Then what's the point? The point is that some people will know the truth. Some people will remember that the Apache tried for peace and were rejected. And maybe, 20 or 50 or 100 years from now, when someone writes the history of what happened here, they'll have the truth to work with. That's all we can do, plant seeds and hope something grows." I thought about that as Quinn and I rode back to my ranch that evening, about seeds and growth and the long, uncertain path of justice. Takala was waiting when we arrived. She'd ridden back earlier with some of the warriors, who'd posted themselves as guards around my property. She met me at the door, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she reached out and took my hand. "You did well today," she said. "I didn't do anything, just stood in the way. Sometimes that is enough." That night, she didn't go to her room. She sat with me by the fire, and we talked about small things and large things and all the things in between, about what would happen at the inquiry, about what we'd do if Hollis came for us, about the future, if we had one. And when the fire burned down to coals, she stood and held out her hand. "Come," she said. I followed her to the bedroom that had been hers. She closed the door behind us and stood looking at me in the dim light. "I am not ready for everything," she said quietly, "but I am ready for this, to not be alone, to be with someone who understands loss and chooses to live anyway. Is that enough?" "Yes," I said. "That's enough." We lay down together, not as lovers, not yet, but as 2 people who'd found their way to each other through fire and blood and the long, hard work of forgiveness. Outside, the guards kept watch. Somewhere to the south, Hollis planned his next move. Somewhere to the north, Kuruk prepared for whatever came next. But in that moment, in that room, we were safe. We were together. And for the first time in 8 years of guilt and 5 years of grief and however many days of uncertainty, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. The inquiry came and went. Judge Thornton examined the evidence, heard testimony from me, from Takala, from Quinn, even from a reluctant soldier who confirmed the tracks matched Army boots. He issued a ruling that found no evidence of Apache involvement in the Morrison fire and recommended a full military investigation into Captain Hollis's conduct. The Army ignored it. 2 days after the ruling, Hollis received reinforcements from Fort Union. 200 soldiers, fresh troops eager for glory and Indian scalps. They set up a perimeter around the Apache hunting grounds and issued an ultimatum: surrender and relocate to a reservation in Arizona or be removed by force. Kuruk refused. The war everyone had been expecting, everyone except those of us who'd tried to stop it, finally began. But it didn't begin the way Hollis wanted. The Apache didn't attack settlements or burn ranches. Instead, they disappeared into the mountains, using guerrilla tactics, striking at supply wagons and isolated patrols, then melting away before the army could respond. And public opinion, at least some of it, began to shift. The inquiry had done what Judge Thornton hoped. It had planted doubt. People asked questions. Why had the army dismissed the judge's findings? If the Apache were such bloodthirsty savages, why weren't they attacking towns? Why did this war feel manufactured? It didn't stop the war, but it complicated it, made it messier, more controversial, harder to justify with simple stories of civilization versus savagery. And one night, 3 weeks into the conflict, Chaska came to my ranch. "My father wants to see you," he said. "Both of you. He has a proposal." We rode out before dawn, following Chaska deep into the mountains to a hidden canyon where Kuruk had established a temporary camp. The chief looked older than when I'd last seen him, worn down by constant movement and the weight of leading his people through another white man's war. "Silas Garrett, Takala. Thank you for coming." He gestured for us to sit by his fire. "I have been thinking about what you said, about Mexico, about starting over." "You're considering leaving?" I asked. "Not all of us. Many will stay and fight. But the women, the children, the elders, they should not have to live like this. Running, hiding, always one step ahead of soldiers. I want to send them south, across the border, where they can be safe. But they will need someone to guide them. Someone the Mexican authorities will not immediately arrest or turn away." He looked at me meaningfully. "You want me to take them," I said. "You and Takala. You speak Spanish, yes? From your time in the army?" "Some, enough to get by. And Takala knows the routes, the ways to move unseen. Together, you could get them across. 70 people, maybe 80, mostly women and children. Once they are safe, you could stay with them or return. That choice would be yours." I looked at Takala. "What do you think?" "I think if we stay here, we die. Hollis will not stop until he kills you, and he will use me to hurt you if he can. But in Mexico," she paused, "in Mexico we could build something, not what we lost, but something new." Kuruk pulled out a leather pouch and handed it to me. Inside were gold coins, more than I'd ever seen in one place. "This is for your ranch," he said. "I cannot buy it fairly, but I can give you something for what you leave behind. Use it to start over, to take care of my people until they can take care of themselves." I stared at the gold, at the weight of it in my hands. "If I do this, I can never come back. The army will call me a traitor, a deserter. They'll put a price on my head." "Yes, but you will be alive, and you will be with Takala, and you will have done one last good thing before you disappear." It was the choice I'd known was coming since the day I'd pulled Chaska from the snow. The choice between the life I'd known and the life I could still have. I looked at my ranch one last time as we prepared to leave. The house where Emily and I had planned to grow old, the barn where Daniel had learned to ride, the small plot behind the house where Ruth had planted a garden that never quite took, and the 3 crosses on the hill. I climbed up there before we left, stood among the graves and said my goodbyes. Not to the people buried there. I'd said those goodbyes a long time ago, but to the life I'd had with them, to the man I'd been, to everything I'd tried to hold on to for so long. "I'm leaving," I told them. "I'm going to Mexico with Takala and Kuruk's people. I'm going to build a new life down there if we make it. I hope that's okay. I hope you'd understand." The wind was my only answer. But maybe that was enough. We left that night, 73 Apache souls and 2 refugees moving south under cover of darkness. It took us 11 days to reach the border. 11 days of traveling at night, hiding during the day, always watching for army patrols. Twice we saw soldiers in the distance. Once we had to hide in a cave for an entire day while a patrol passed within 100 yards. But we made it. We crossed the Rio Grande on a moonless night, wading through chest-deep water, carrying children on our shoulders and elders on makeshift stretchers. When we finally climbed up the far bank and stood on Mexican soil, a cheer went up from the group, quickly hushed, but no less heartfelt. We were free. Not safe, not yet, but free. We settled in a small village in Chihuahua, far enough from the border that the American army wouldn't follow. The locals were wary at first, but Kuruk's gold bought us land and time, and gradually we became part of the community. Takala and I built a small adobe house on the edge of the village. Nothing fancy. One room for sleeping, one for cooking, a covered porch where we sat in the evenings and watched the sun set over the mountains. 6 months after we arrived, Takala told me she was pregnant. We married according to Mexican law that same week. Not because we had to, but because we wanted to. Because somewhere in the journey from my ranch to this new life, somewhere between standing against Hollis and crossing the river, we'd become something more than two damaged people sharing space. We'd become family. Our son was born in the spring of 1885. We named him Daniel Matto Garrett, after my lost son and her lost husband. It felt right, honoring both our pasts while building our future. Chaska came to visit when the baby was 3 months old. He brought news from the north. The war had ended with a treaty. The Apache had been forced onto reservations, their lands taken, their way of life destroyed. Kuruk had surrendered to save the survivors. "My father asked me to tell you something," Chaska said, holding Daniel with awkward care. "He said the debt is paid. You gave him his son's life twice. Once when you saved me, and again when you saved all those people by getting them to safety. He says you are family now, and family owes no debts." "Tell him thank you," I said, "and tell him I'm sorry it ended the way it did." He knows. But he also says this: some fights you lose, but you fight them anyway because not fighting means losing who you are. He does not regret resisting. He only regrets that it was not enough. After Chaska left, Takala and I sat on the porch with Daniel sleeping between us. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Everything you gave up? Your ranch, your country, your old life?" I thought about it. About Emily and the children sleeping on that hill in New Mexico. About the ranch I'd built with my own hands. About the life that had been stolen by sickness and time. "No," I said, "I don't regret it. I wish they were still alive. I wish things had been different. But if they hadn't died, I wouldn't have been alone. If I hadn't been alone, I wouldn't have saved Chaska. And if I hadn't saved Chaska, I never would have met you. So no, I don't regret the path that brought me here." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "I still miss Matto sometimes. I still think about the life we could have had." "I know. But I am happy here, with you, with our son. Is it wrong to be happy when so many others suffer? No. I think the people who suffer would want us to be happy. I think they'd want us to build something good from all the ashes." We sat in silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the village someone was playing guitar. Somewhere closer, a woman sang to her child. Life continuing despite everything. Daniel stirred and made a small sound, not quite a cry. Takala picked him up and held him close. "What will we tell him?" she asked. "About how we met? About what happened? The truth. When he's old enough to understand. We'll tell him about Chaska and the blood in the snow. About his grandfather Kuruk and the test of honor. About the ranch that burned and the war that came. About two people who had every reason to hate each other and chose something different. And if he asks why we chose each other?" I looked at her, at our son, at the home we'd built from nothing. "We'll tell him that love isn't about deserving or earning or being worthy. It's about choosing. Every day, in 100 small ways, choosing to stay, choosing to try, choosing to believe that tomorrow might be better than yesterday." "Is that what this is?" she asked quietly. "Love?" "Yes," I said. "I think it is." She smiled, and in that smile I saw everything we'd survived and everything we'd built and everything we might yet become. The sun set. The stars came out. Daniel fell asleep in his mother's arms. And for the first time since I'd stood in my kitchen in New Mexico, looking at a photograph of a family I'd lost, I felt complete. Not whole. The scars remained. The guilt over Matto would always be there, muted but present. The grief for Emily and Daniel and Ruth would never fully disappear, but complete. Like a story that had found its ending, not the one I'd expected or even wanted, but the one I needed. Years later, when Daniel was old enough to understand, I told him everything about the war and the ranch and the woman who'd been forced into my life by a debt I'd never asked for, about how we'd chosen each other despite the blood between us. He listened carefully, this boy who carried the names of 2 dead men and the hope of 2 living parents. When I finished, he asked one question. Was it worth it? Everything you lost? I looked at Takala, at the gray in her hair and the lines around her eyes and the way she still smiled when she looked at me. Yes, I said, every bit of it. And I meant it, because some debts can only be paid in life, not death. In choosing to live, to love, to build instead of destroy. The rancher's choice wasn't between right and wrong, it was between who I'd been and who I could become, and I chose to become someone worthy of a second chance. That, in the end, was worth everything. The years passed quietly in our Mexican village. Takala and I grew old together, watching Daniel grow from a baby into a serious young man who inherited his mother's determination and his father's stubbornness. We had 2 more children after him, a daughter we named Emily Ruth, and another son we called Samuel. Kuruk visited twice more before he died. The last time, he was an old man, his warrior days long behind him, living on the reservation where the government had confined what remained of his people. He held Daniel, who was then 15, and said, "This boy carries 2 peoples in his blood. Make sure he honors both." We did. In 1903, when I was 62 and my hair had gone completely white, Takala woke me one morning and said she was tired. Not sick, just tired. She died 3 days later, peacefully, with her hand in mine, and all our children gathered around her bed. I buried her on the hill behind our house, under a mesquite tree she'd always loved. I didn't carve her name in English. I carved it in Apache, the way her mother had taught her to write it. And underneath, I carved, "She chose to stay. I chose to be worthy of that choice." I lived another 6 years after that, long enough to see Daniel graduate from medical school in Mexico City, long enough to see Emily Ruth marry a good man, long enough to hold my first grandchild. When I died in 1909, they buried me next to Takala. Daniel carved my stone himself. It read simply, "Silas Garrett, husband, father. He learned to choose." But the story didn't end there. In 1924, Daniel Matto Garrett crossed back into the United States for the first time since he was an infant. By then, the laws had changed. The Dawes Act had been amended. Indians could be citizens. Mixed marriages were legal in most territories. He opened a medical practice in Santa Fe, becoming the first Apache-American doctor in New Mexico. He treated everyone, white and Apache alike, never asking about politics or history, only about symptoms and suffering. When reporters asked about his unusual name, about his mixed heritage, about his parents' story, he would pull out a photograph he always carried, a young rancher and an Apache woman standing in front of an adobe house, holding a baby between them. "My father was a soldier who killed my mother's first husband in battle," he would say. "My mother was given to my father as payment for a debt. They had every reason to hate each other, but they chose something different." "What did they choose?" the reporters would ask. "They chose to see each other as people, not enemies. They chose to build instead of destroy. They chose to believe that the future didn't have to repeat the past." He would pause, looking at the photograph. "And they chose to love each other, not because it was easy, but because it was right." On the back of that photograph, in faded ink, was written in his father's handwriting, "Mexico, spring 1885, Takala, Daniel, and me. We chose each other. That made all the difference. S.G." Daniel kept that photograph on his desk until the day he died in 1967 at the age of 82. His children inherited it and their children after them, and it still exists today in a museum in Santa Fe, a small testament to a rancher's choice and the life that grew from it. The debt was paid, the story was told, and the choice echoed down through generations. The end.